Imagine standing on a fjord's edge, the northern wind cutting through your thick wool cloak like 1,000 tiny knives. It's night, the temperature is plunging below -30 degrees F, and your breath freezes midair, hanging like ghostly lanterns. You've been out there for hours, maybe days, surviving on what little fire you can muster, but your hands are numb, your spirit fraying. Now picture this. In the same bitter chill, somewhere in a smoky Viking forge, a blacksmith pulls a molten bar from a roaring forge, and against all odds, forges a perfect sword in just 6 hours. Not days, not weeks. 6. How in the frostbitten world could they do that? What kind of magic or insane craftsmanship made that possible? Welcome to the brutal beauty of Viking ironwork, where survival wasn't just about brute strength, but about mastering fire, metal, and some seriously clever shortcuts that would boggle even the sharpest modern minds. This might be the strangest Viking survival trick you didn't know about. They didn't just hammer swords. They engineered masterpieces under time and temperature pressures that would snap any ordinary steel in a heartbeat. The secret, it wasn't just the heat or the anvil or even the iron ore. They wielded the harsh environment to their advantage, turning nature's worst into a powerful ally. Vikings crafted swords that held razor edges and legendary durability by exploiting ancient metallurgical phenomena that today's scientists are only beginning to understand, but perfectly executed by hand centuries ago. Think of it like the medieval version of a Formula One pit stop, but for weapons, where precision, speed, and heat control merged into an art form that saved lives and shaped history. Let's start with the first mind-blowing concept: the Viking smith's use of what's called pattern welding, a technique that looked almost like blade magic. Forget the Hollywood version, where swords come fully formed from a spark. These blades were layered works of art. The smiths welded together strips of different iron and steel types, often twisting and folding them multiple times, typically 10 to 15 folds, creating banded patterns both stunning and functional. Why? Because combining soft iron with hard steel gave the blade both resilience and sharpness, kind of like how modern bulletproof vests layer Kevlar and ceramics to combine flexibility and hardness. This process transformed ordinary raw materials into a sword that was surprisingly tough, yet deadly sharp. Imagine the layers of steel like pages of a book. Each fold a new page that strengthened the whole story. Technically, this folding increased the carbon content evenly throughout the blade, often hitting around 0.6% to 1% carbon, just the right balance for hardness without brittleness. Viking forges reached temperatures near 22 degrees F, just enough to cause the metals to weld together without melting completely, allowing smiths to manipulate their sword's internal structure with fiery precision. In modern terms, this is akin to carefully tempering a high-carbon steel blade in a workshop today, but without the luxury of electric furnaces or temperature gauges. They relied on eye, smell, and experience. A glowing orange hardened the coal, and that was enough. Think about it, holding your hand just outside a 2,000 degrees F forge, all while hammering twisted bars into a seamless, battle-ready blade. But pattern welding wasn't just for show. It had practical benefits that went beyond aesthetics. These layered swords could flex under incredible stress, better than many simple, solid blades made from a single cast piece. Vikings needed their swords to survive blows from axes, shields, and the constant clang of battle. It's almost like nature's version of Gore-Tex, breathable yet protective layers, able to bend without breaking. And given the brutal Viking battles where a single strike could be a death sentence, every fraction of performance mattered. This technique condensed what modern blacksmiths might spend weeks perfecting into something achievable in a matter of hours, thanks to the smiths' legendary speed and skill. But all this folding and hammering would have been useless without the Vikings' innovative use of controlled cooling, a process we now call quenching. After shaping their twisted blades, smiths plunged them into water or oil baths, rapidly cooling the hot metal to lock in their hard edge. Sounds simple, right? But it was an exact science. Cooling too fast made the steel brittle and prone to snapping, too slow, and the sword would lose its sharp edge, becoming soft and useless in battle. Vikings mastered this balance with a precision that feels almost magical, especially considering they had no digital thermometers, just centuries of experience passed down in whispers and apprenticeships. Picture this: dipping a glowing, forged blade into a bucket of icy Nordic water, near freezing temperatures, around 32 degrees F, followed by a careful reheating or tempering phase to relieve stresses in the metal. This cycle could be repeated multiple times in 6 hours, giving each sword a balance that combined hardness for slicing through armor and flexibility to absorb shock. Today's knife enthusiasts would give anything to replicate that level of performance without wasting weeks on trial and error. Viking smiths, however, did it routinely while sitting beside roaring fires and feasting Vikings, all under extreme time pressure. And it didn't stop there. Vikings tackled another huge challenge: the quality and consistency of their iron ore. Unlike modern steelmaking, where purity and alloying elements are strictly controlled, their raw materials were messy, often laden with slag and impurities. So how did they get around that? Here's the brilliant hack. They used bloomery furnaces, small-scale yet incredibly effective ovens designed to smelt iron directly from ore, creating a material called bloom iron or wrought iron, which contained tiny pockets of slag that actually helped with the sword's toughness. Think of those slag inclusions as nature's primitive shock absorbers, almost like microscopic bubble wrap that could stop cracks in their tracks. That small percentage of impurities, around 2 to 5% slag, included in the bloom iron was critical for endurance, preventing catastrophic fractures in battle. The bloomery was a low-tech but high-impact invention. It ran on charcoal, which burned hot and fairly clean, reaching stable temperatures of about 16.0 to 18.0 degrees F, enough to reduce iron ore into spongy iron blooms. Unlike later blast furnaces, these blooms had to be hammered immediately, squeezing out slag and densifying the metal, a brutal dance of fire and muscle. This immediate processing meant smiths worked with fresh, reactive iron, making the 6-hour sword creation timeline tight, but still doable. The bloomery technique was the backbone of Viking metalworking, and without it, those legendary swords would have been little more than glorified farm tools. But even with quality metal and layered design, the sword's grip and balance had to be just right. Vikings understood this perfectly, layering their creations with wooden cores wrapped in leather, and sometimes bronze or silver inlays, an ancient form of ergonomic design that even the fanciest modern knives envy. Every component was calculated to distribute weight so a warrior could swing fiercely but remain agile. Imagine a handle designed like a modern sports car's steering wheel: precision, feel, and control wrapped into one. So while the steel blade took center stage, the handle was the hidden hero, the interface between man and weapon, honed on feedback from countless brutal skirmishes where a second's hesitation meant death. And here's a twist: the final details were added only after the sword cooled completely. This included polishing the blade to razor sharpness, sometimes using fine sand or animal bone, a medieval version of a multi-tool sharpening kit. Vikings actually spent considerable time buffing edges, to a point where the microscopic teeth of the blade could tear through leather and flesh with terrifying ease. This polishing wasn't just cosmetic. It improved the sword's ability to resist rust, given the damp Scandinavian climate, a natural battle against time and moisture, like an ancient hot water bottle warding off the cold. The entire process, from raw ore to gleaming weapon, was compressed into that intense 6-hour window, a feat of endurance, skill, and time management. But nothing in Viking smithing was more vital than the forge itself. These were no ordinary fires. They used the power of the bellows, large leather bags pumped by foot or hand to blast oxygen into the charcoal fire, boosting furnace temperatures like a 1000 W heater cranked to max. Furnace temperatures peaked at around 22.0 degrees F, hot enough to melt the steel's outer layers without spoiling inner structure, allowing the smith to rapidly shape and reshape the sword with precision. Essentially, the bellows gave them control over fire intensity minute by minute, a massive advantage when time was of the essence. This wasn't just work. It was a fiery performance where every puff breathed life into a blade destined for the sagas. And bellows didn't just speed up heating. They also helped maintain consistent forge temperatures throughout the process, something modern blacksmiths fight to fine-tune with fancy digital controllers. Imagine trying to keep a 2000+ degrees F fire steady, using human lungs and sinew-driven bellows, all while pounding red-hot steel that glows brighter than the northern lights. It might sound crazy, but this rhythmic pumping and hammering is what gave Vikings that mad 6-hour window to produce swords that still astound collectors and historians today. So you can start to see the big picture now. This wasn't luck or magic. It was a complex choreography of natural resources, raw materials, human muscle, and perfect timing. But that's only half the story, because even with all that metal mastery, Vikings needed to account for the brutal northern climate. The hardest sword in the world would be useless if the warrior wielding it couldn't survive the cold long enough to fight. Which brings us to their hidden weapon in the battle against frost, the Viking jacket of warmth, a clever combo of layered animal furs and leathers designed to trap heat like a castle defending against winter's siege. Imagine wearing something like nature's version of high-tech insulated bubble wrap that kept their body temperatures near 98.6 degrees F, even when outside temps plunged below minus 30 degrees F. Their clothing layers could be 2 to 3 feet thick in places, stuffing air pockets that acted as ancient hot water bottles to insulate and protect. Each garment wasn't just clothing, but an engineered survival system, hand-tailored to withstand Arctic blasts, so warriors could endure hours of waiting in the cold, sharpening or fighting, all while their swords were still being forged nearby. But all that warmth would vanish if their fingers froze or movement slowed. So smiths and warriors alike developed a range of survival hacks to keep blood flowing, from strategic campfire arrangements that mimicked modern radiant heating to consuming diets rich in animal fat, up to 75% of daily calories, to boost internal body heat. This high-fat diet was the Vikings' metabolic furnace, ensuring their muscles didn't just work, they thrived in sub-zero chaos. And it didn't stop at just surviving. Vikings optimized their environments by choosing forge locations carefully. Sheltered caves, south-facing slopes, even building windbreaks from logs and stone, gave their forges semi-protected microclimates where fires burned hotter and longer. These microclimates acted like nature's version of thermal greenhouses, trapping heat and improving ironwork efficiency. Without such preparation, that 6-hour perfect sword would be a fantasy confined to warm rooms far from icy battlefields. But even with all these incredible adaptations, from metallurgical wizardry to survival savvy, the question remains: how did they maintain such precision under immense time pressure and physical exhaustion? 6 hours might sound long, but when you factor in multiple heating cycles, hammering, folding, cooling, and even polishing, it's an absolute sprint. That's what makes Viking sword forging not just craftsmanship, but human endurance pushed to its legendary limits. And guess what? The answer lies not just in the smiths, but in the entire Viking community. Support from apprentices, family, and fellow warriors created a rhythm and flow that kept the workshop humming like a well-oiled machine. Picture apprentices carrying buckets of water, assistants pumping bellows, all timed perfectly so that each hammer strike and cooling dip happened without a moment wasted. The entire forge was alive with purposeful energy, a perfect example of emergent teamwork long before industrial assembly lines. Stay with me, because next you'll discover the mind-bending secret to how this entire 6-hour process was optimized by Vikings using an ingenious timing system based on natural cues only visible in the midnight sun, and how that system supercharged sword production all across Scandinavia. If you thought this was impressive so far, wait until you hear about how Vikings managed to miniaturize the control systems of their blast furnaces without even knowing it. This is where human ingenuity and natural cycles collide in a way that will change how you think about ancient technology forever. Now, here's where the real Viking genius kicks into overdrive. Imagine trying to keep all of that, heating, pounding, folding, cooling, on a razor-sharp schedule without watches, clocks, or even the sun to guide you. At these northern latitudes, during the height of summer, the sun barely dips below the horizon, creating what's known as the midnight sun. Vikings turned this eerie natural phenomenon into their ultimate timekeeper. Picture a smith glancing out the smoky forge window at a pale, glowing sky at midnight, using the exact position of that sun, combined with shadows and atmospheric colors, to segment their 6-hour sword production into precise phases. It was nature's own stopwatch. No batteries, no numbers, just the slow, steady dance of daylight itself. This biological clock wasn't just quaint folklore, it was a scientifically timed system, honed over generations, enabling smiths to synchronize their heating cycles and hammer blows exactly when the forge was hottest, or just cooling enough for the next stage. Think of it as the Viking equivalent of a high-precision, solar-powered chronometer embedded right in the sky. But the midnight sun couldn't do all the work. The Vikings also leveraged an ingenious system of auditory cues, something we'd call an ancient workflow automation. Imagine a choir of sounds echoing around the forge, the rhythmic pumping of leather bellows, each hiss and sigh signaling the perfect oxygen blast, the steady clang of hammer against red-hot steel, timed like the ticking of a metronome, even the crackling of the charcoal fire, reacting instantly to the smith's breath, adjusting in pitch and intensity to signal the perfect forging moment. It was a symphony of survival, an unspoken language crafted to optimize timing and prevent errors that could cost hours, or even a ruined sword. Basically, the Viking forge was a live soundboard of feedback, where every noise painted a picture of the forge's current temperature, energy, and metal readiness. Compared to today's digital pulse monitors in industrial foundries, the Viking forge's acoustic and visual dance was low-tech, but no less effective. Speaking of tools, the Vikings had another secret weapon: incredibly well-crafted hammers and anvils perfectly balanced for rapid, precise work. These weren't just hammers. They were engineered extensions of the smith's arm, weighing between 1.5 to 3 pounds, with handles shaped to maximize grip and leverage while minimizing fatigue during relentless pounding sessions. Imagine swinging a finely tuned hammer that fits your hand like a glove, the steel head bouncing energy right back into your palm, allowing lightning-fast folding and shaping. The anvils, made from the hardest slags and land-forged steel, had polished flat tops with rounded edges, perfect for creating those intricate layered patterns without cracking the blade. In modern terms, think of a Formula One car's steering wheel, custom designed for responsiveness and endurance, not just raw strength. This level of tool refinement compressed hours of metalwork into minutes, ensuring the smith could maintain a furious pace without losing control. But let's zoom back out to the environment, because surviving the freezing Arctic didn't just mean surviving the cold, it meant controlling moisture. Excess moisture is the enemy of steel, turning swords to rust and ruin, sometimes overnight. Vikings tackled this by integrating smokehouse principles into their forge areas. Picture this: forges built near or inside longhouses with constantly burning hearths that pumped warm, smoke-filled air over racks where finished blades rested. The smoke acted like a natural desiccant, creating a dry, carbon-rich atmosphere that stalled rust formation, almost like a medieval rust-proof coating. This was no accident. They understood that moisture was deadly to fresh steel, and took deliberate steps to keep their weapons pristine even in damp fjord climates. It's a bit like modern automotive rust inhibitors or climate-controlled museums, but powered by a simple fireplace and keen observation. This knowledge made all the difference. Swords stayed battle-ready for months or even years, stored safely away from nature's corrosive bite. And then there's one of the most brilliant elements: the Vikings' mastery over temperatures at different forge stages. They knew that a sword's true strength wasn't just how hot the metal got, but how often and how precisely they heated and cooled it during those 6 hours. They practiced multiple cycles of rapid heating to about 19 degrees F, shaping the blade at its softest point, and then cooling aggressively to only 72 degrees F, the water bath, locking in hardness. This wasn't random. It was calculated to push the steel's crystalline structure into a phase called martensite, which is both incredibly strong and shock-resistant. Then came the tempering phase, gently reheating the blade to around 400 degrees F to relieve internal stresses and prevent brittleness. Vikings repeated this thermal roller coaster multiple times, delicately balancing forces that modern metallurgists spend months trying to replicate. It's like they had a deep biological understanding of steel's molecular secrets, fine-tuned by decades of trial, triumph, and error. But what about the seemingly human side behind this blazing engine of creation? The Viking blacksmith was not a lone wolf, but a community-driven craftsman with rituals and rhythms that blended work and celebration. After every folding or heating phase, apprentices would slap the smith on the back or pass him a tankard of mead, fuel for the soul as much as the body. Imagine the forge filled with the clang of metal, the hiss of steam from quenching, and bursts of hearty laughter, all timed like a tribal heartbeat. This social energy wasn't just morale boosting. It sped up the process by turning hard labor into a synchronized dance fueled by trust and companionship. It's the ultimate reminder that craftsmanship, even at its most technical, thrives best when it's a shared human experience rather than an isolated ordeal. Now, all these remarkable physical and social adaptations culminated in a sword that was more than just a weapon. It was a testimony of survival, resilience, and identity. Think of how every curve and fold told stories of battles fought and won, not just in the fractal patterns of the steel, but in the hearts that wielded them. Vikings understood that a sword was an extension of the warrior's soul, forged not just to kill, but to endure lifetimes. A legacy passed from father to son, a symbol of family honor and protection. Imagine the pressure of pouring everything you had into a weapon that might seize the moment between life and death in a blink. So what can we learn from this ancient 6-hour forge marathon today? In a world where instant gratification is king, Vikings remind us that mastery comes from a fusion of patience, instinct, community, and relentless innovation, even under the harshest conditions. Their swords weren't just tools. They were miracles of adaptation, blending nature's raw elements with human ingenuity to survive and thrive. This is how technology, artistry, and survival instinct intertwine to shape history, pointing to a truth that resonates across centuries. True craftsmanship isn't about taking your time, but about making every second count. As you imagine that glowing blade, forged with thunderous hammer strikes and midnight sun guidance, remember this. Behind every sword was a relentless human spirit refusing to be conquered by cold, time, or fate. Every choice the Vikings made came from a fierce will to protect their families, their legacy, and their future. The cold, the fire, the metal, they all fused into a narrative of endurance, ensuring these swords weren't just weapons but storytellers of an age where survival meant turning the impossible into the inevitable. And isn't that the greatest forge of all, the one within us? The courage to create, adapt, and persist against wild odds, just like those smiths pounding in the heart of an icebound world. So the next time you think about ancient technology or the art of survival, remember the 6-hour Viking sword, a blazing testament to human brilliance forged at the edge of the world, where fire met ice and something phenomenal was born.